in the economy, we are faced with regulation overkill. Government has got too big, too fast, and too powerful. Every resident in this town is affected by this particular bylaw that lives within 100 feet of a wetland. This bylaw presently was with our board, which I happen to be on the Community Planning Board. We met with the Conservation Commission and they agreed to shift the bylaw, rather the zoning law, from the Community Planning Board to the Conservation Commission. Our whole board agreed with that. I agreed with it. As it went from the Community Planning Board to the Conservation Commission, they engaged the services of a consultant and started to add fee after fee after fee to this bylaw, and regulation after regulation after regulation. This bylaw, if it's passed the way it's presented to you tonight, affects the homeowner, as I said, within 100 foot of a wetland. If you want to do as much as cut a tree down on your property, and if you look further on in the article, and I know nobody has time to read this whole thing, but if you look under number H, under the term as the alterations, it says, cutting of trees. This thing, if you want to do any type of repair work on your property, you're going to have to go before the Conservation Commission and get a special permit. As it stands right now, all you have to do is go before the Community Planning Board to obtain a special permit to work within a wetland. The Conservation still has the power to set an order of conditions on that permit. That's the way it works now, and it's very less expensive. For instance, if you want to put an addition on your present home and you apply for this permit, what you will do on the application is they will require you to hire engineers, designers, consultants, and you submit the plan to this board. They have the power under this particular law. If you look under the fee structure, where it says, in addition to the filing fee, the Commission shall require the applicant to pay the reasonable costs and expenses of any expert consultant deemed necessary by the Commission to review the application, which means after you submit your application, you will pay the people that they want to hire to review your plan. Now, you've already paid people to draw up your plan, submit your plan, and represent you as an expert at their meeting. Now you'll pay another set of consultants the exact same setup that you've already paid. So you're paying twice. Now suppose there's a disagreement in your application and you're denied the right to your application after you've paid all these fees. The only outlet you have is to go to Superior Court. If you go to Superior Court, who are you paying again? You're paying your experts and you're paying their experts. It's a very, very costly bylaw, ladies and gentlemen. We've lived under Chapter 131, Section 40 of the Mass General Laws for a long, long time. There's no reason we can't stay under that law. If you pass this thing, it'll come back and haunt you. I can guarantee you that. Government is just too strong. I'm going to ask you to support me, join with me again, defeat the article, and let the Conservation Commission go back and review the fees. They haven't told you one cost factor to this thing. They said, well, after the law passes, we'll let the selectmen establish the fee. Well, what is the fee? What is the cost? What is the true cost of this application, or to this bylaw? I cannot believe, ladies and gentlemen, I can believe, as a member of the Community Planning Board, that I represent you, and I'm representing you fairly here tonight. I cannot believe that the Board of Selectmen, the Town Administrator, or any other member of my board, or the Conservation Commission can say to you that this is a good bylaw for you to buy, because it's affecting you, the house owner, and you're the ones that are going to get affected by it. Under subdivision control, when they come in, the big developers come in, they have to come before the Planning Board and the Conservation Commission. The orders of conditions are set down. Those two boards, in fact, enforce every one of them. We passed site plan review, and I supported it at last October's town meeting. Site plan review, an applicant under subdivision control has to pay all sorts of consultants to do site plan inspection, and every phase of the operation is inspected on an annual, as-built basis. For every phase of a subdivision, there's a site inspection, and that inspector has to be paid by the builder. This thing directly affects only homeowners in this town. And don't kid yourself, if you pass it, you're going to be very, very sorry, and you're going to lose an awful lot of money, and you'll be denied an awful lot of permits. I ask you very, very positive to please defeat this article. Thank you.
Mr. Isia, please state your name and address, sir. Yeah, Frank Ethia, 5 Anthony Road. I'm a member of the Conservation Commission. I've just got a few comments. First to Mr. Sylvia, the 2 examples that he mentioned are a good reason that we should have the general bylaw. Those 2 homes that he mentioned do meet all the regulations, they are consistent with state law in regard to building within proximity to wetlands. And the passing of the general bylaw should enable us to have protections which I wouldn't say would necessarily stop that particular development, but they would allow further protections to the town, would have some local say in the matter. So I think that example he mentioned actually is supportive of the general bylaw. In regard to Mr. Smith's comments, I just would implore that the members of town meeting not be intimidated by the argument, which really was not very specific at all. This is an enabling act. There are no fees or further expenses that are mentioned in it, and there are protections, and there's methods in the enabling act as to how those fees would be set, and there'd be public debate on the setting of those. Now, in Conservation Commission, we have spoken with applicants as they've come before us, specifically professional engineers, and asked their opinions on this matter. At this point in time, the North Reading does not have the services that we used to have, an assistant town engineer. As a result, we cannot provide the basic services that are required to properly review applicants' projects. The addition of this, passing of this law would enable the hiring of having a conservation agent who could work with applicants prior to public hearings that could work out whatever difficulties may be involved, and in fact would speed up the process and make the process more effective, and in the long run be a cheaper and a more effective mechanism for the applicants. In regard to his comments on the cutting of trees by state law, and the activity within the buffer zone right now does require a determination, and that activity currently would have to go before the Conservation Commission. There's no change in that. There is no fee involved with that. That's a determination, and the purpose of that is to define the scope of work so that everybody knows what's going on, and the scope of the work doesn't exceed the regulations of the state and what would be the general bylaw. Thank you.
Mr. Piero.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. Jerry Pierce, 17 Rogers Circle. I agreed with Mr. Smith. This is never seen this down here. I've been through the rigmarole. I hope you all understand what goes on in this town here. It's now going on terrible in this town here. Takes a year to get a permit to do something down here. Now, more bureaucracy's coming here. More rulers of abolition. This is awful, terrible. I've been through this rigmarole.
Mr. Pasquale.
Point of clarification from the gentleman just spoke. What my ears heard was we're going to hire a compensation agent. And I'm looking at Article 19, and my eyes go so fast. I don't say anything about hiring any compensation agent in this article. So why are you confusing me?
Mr. Ethia.
I thought, or I intended to say conservation agent, and that's not part of the general bylaw.
You said hiring. The paraphrase, you said hiring a compensation agent, and I'm talking about Article 19. It has nothing to do about hiring.
That's correct. It doesn't have anything to do about hiring.
The next article does, that I'm going to comment on.
That's correct. What the article, the general bylaw does have, it does have a fee schedule. Okay, and the fee schedule could be used to provide basic services which would streamline the work. Okay.
Mr. Spear.
MS Spear, 41 Lakeside Boulevard. I'd like to speak in favor of Mr. Smith's position. I can relate a personal story very briefly. My brother is a civil engineer. I went to build an addition on my house. I was told the floodplain was in a certain position by the assistant town engineer at that time. When we determined where the floodplain was at 83 feet, which was raised from a previous level of 81 feet, we found out that at the dam at Lakeside Boulevard, if I were standing on that dam on the asphalt, the water would have to be over my head. I brought that point in from 2 benchmarks on Route 28, and I can determine that put quite accuracy to within 5/8 of an inch. I think the information that's presented and is used by these boards is very often erroneous, and before we give them all kinds of power to enforce these regulations, we ought to look at what we're regulating. I hope everyone will support Mr. Smith.
Mr. Carucci.
Charles Carucci, Planning Commission. The reason the Planning Commission has moved this article to the Conservation is very simple. Conservation has a tendency to deal strictly with water matters out there. Now, the WFPD, which the CPC now handles, is strictly for insurance purposes. If you live in a flood area, if we do not have a WFPD zone, you cannot buy flood insurance. So we've decided that what we're doing is duplication work as far as the conservation is concerned. And what we asked was conservation to take the water part of it, we would administrate the floodplain, and conservation would take all their readings, and we would agree with them. Now, what happens here, even on the Planning Commission, we have the right to charge a certain fee that the state has allowed us to do. So that means that if somebody came in, we have the right to charge them, the same as the conservation does. Mr. Smith is trying to build a case as far as charges. We're allowed to do that. You have to appeal our decision also to the Superior Court, so that you know that also. Thank you.
Mr. Smith, you've already spoken on the article, so just briefly to answer a question or to rectify an error.
A point of clarification, what Mr. Carucci said is true, but it never has happened. And I did want to bring out what Mr. Pasquale did bring out, and that's if you look forward from this article to Article 20, you will see that the Conservation Commission wants to spend up to $100,000 for the purpose of enforcement through administration, engineering, inspection, and enforcement. We don't need this type of regulation. Leave it where it is. And when I talk to each one of the members on my board, and I talk to the gentleman that talked to you just a few minutes ago, and I forget your name, from the Conservation, but when I talk to them on a one-on-one basis, you know what they told me? You're absolutely right. This thing is too expensive. And that's the gospel truth. And what they're telling you tonight is a lot of nothing as far as fees go. For some reason, they're evading the issue. And believe me when I tell you, if you vote this in, you're going to get crushed. Keep it out of here. Keep it where it is, and let government operate the way it is. Thank you.
Mr. Isia, to answer a question, or?
Well, actually, a little bit of a rebuttal. Again, please don't be intimidated. The Conservation Commission doesn't want to spend $100,000. That $100,000 is just reflective of the, as I understand it, the particular state law that regulates that. So that's a state limit on that, and we have no intent, and that doesn't enable us to spend $100,000. It just limits it to $100,000 to be consistent with state law. Mr. Smith's comment is really taken out of context. When basic services were provided by the town, they were provided relatively cheaply to the applicant. Now that the town can't afford out of general taxation to provide those basic services, we're requesting service fees, which is consistent with the municipal law now, so that those services can still be there. However, they do have to be paid by the applicant who is requiring those services. And in doing so, the cost for those services is higher because you're not using a town employee. So the consultant fee per hour is actually higher, and that's true. But again, the fees that are required will not be paid by general taxation, but will be covered by the people who requiring those services, and that's the applicant, which I think is quite appropriate.
Mrs. Norris, please state your name and address, ma'am.
Diane Norris, 240 Elm Street. Like my friend and neighbor, Mr. Smith, I live on the Ipswich River, and I have property that is impacted by wetlands, so I would be, if it is negatively impacted, and I would argue to you that I support this particular warrant article.